Hello, my name is Katrin. I'm almost 16 years old. I'm a pretty girl and I love my house very much. I mean it. I like everything here. My room with cute floral curtains, a bench near the house, which is refreshing to knit on, sitting in the shade of a cherry tree. I love my relatives. It's always so exciting to hang out with them. Now, you might say that I'm a homebody. And you probably will be right. I really love to be at home. I go to school, but I don't like it. It's not the best place in the world, but not hell either. It is quite possible to go there, but the constant noise, classmates who always laugh and make silly jokes at everyone, teachers who divide students not according to knowledge but according to their sympathies. You know, all this cannot please. You ask if I have friends? Yes, but not at school. For example, my brother is my best friend, or my parents. They would never give bad advice. Or my aunts and uncles. They are the sweetest people who always have something interesting to say or a funny joke. Well, about my classmates? Yes, they are simply not interesting. They only have outfits, clubs, and dates on their minds, and yet they don't understand how you can need things for yourself, walk with a braid to the waist, and to wear no makeup at all. I'm a gray mouse in a grandmother's sweater. I think that I'm a pretty positive girl, and beauty should be natural. Don't think that I'm fat. On the contrary, I'm thin, short, and I have big brown eyes. In general, we can say that my appearance is in trend. So, my life is peaceful and understandable. Everything is according to plan, and I like everything. Only my brother thinks that I'm not much around people, and I need to go out more. At first, everyone didn't pay attention, but then they began to listen and come up with my public outings. For example, my aunt took over the cultural parts, museums, theaters, parks. My parents decided that it was necessary to acquaint me with all the nature in the area. My uncle introduced me to fishing. In a word, all this was not bad, even interesting. It didn't stop me from knitting at all. It was only inconvenient in the theater, but the performance was already impressive. In the museum, I was once mistaken for the staff of the hall, and they offered me money for photographing. Can you imagine that? Horrible! What's wrong with modern Moors? Not paying for the opportunity to take pictures in a museum and then offering a bribe for being caught? No, they didn't want to pay a fine. When they saw a girl in the corner of the hall knitting and watching them, they decided to dissipate everything with money and began to show it at me. But I was not at a loss and called the administration of the museum and handed them over. For this, by the way, they declared gratitude to me. So my outings were quite impressive, but it was still more comfortable at home. This summer, rock band posters were on all billboards. I don't get it, but my brother was absolutely delighted. He talked about it all the time. Of course, he was gonna go there with friends. My parents weren't against it, and he began to persuade them to take me with him. I wasn't very supportive because I do not like being out late, but he convinced them. He insisted that I had never seen anything like this and that I would definitely like it. Then my braid would become shorter, the skirt would be denim, and the jumper would turn into a t-shirt. And finally, I will get a taste of life. Of course I doubted, but I was interested. Before the concert, he convinced me to put on a dress and tie my hair into a ponytail, put a small purse in my hands, examined me from head to toe, decided that I looked quite tolerable, and then asked me to charge my phone and not lose the sight of him for a second, and off we went. It was a huge stadium. Even from afar we heard deafening music. It was already getting dark on the street. A crowd of people was advancing towards the entrance. They checked their tickets, searched their bags with a metal detector. There were a lot of people around me. It seemed like they were ordinary people, but their outfits, very short skirts, transparent t-shirts, torn clothes, colored hair, it was extraordinary. I looked down and just followed my brother. We moved in the crowd, getting closer and closer to the stage. Suddenly, a guy fell on us. I jumped to the side, the group of people moved towards us, and I lost my brother. I had to look up. The dragon looked directly at me and wiggled its wings. Then I saw a person's face with lots of rings everywhere. He laughed and even had a ring on his tongue. Lights and music darted all over the field. Someone was singing or just shouting loud. The drums were beating the rhythm from the stage. I turned away sharply and saw a guy with a hole in his cheek. Well, straight through. I screamed. A girl turned to me completely bald with the phosphoric eyes. She grabbed my hand, started screaming and jumping. The drums sounded even louder. I broke free and called my brother, but she walked towards me in a raincoat with a seat. I jumped away from her and fell. Something shaggy was leaning over me. It was a guy with hair was like waxed and matted, and he helped me get up. I had a feeling that it was the Medusa. The next thing I remember was how I ran to the exit. Scary characters rushed past me, types with a red brush of hair in their heads, or in chains, in leather, in mask, or in long black clothes and almost naked. All this time, music rumbled and a drum beat on the stage. I ran to the parking lot and huddled in a corner near the car. At home, they brewed me tea. My brother laughed. I cried. I felt like I was in hell. I was shocked by what I saw that night. And what is the worst thing you saw? Write in the comments below this video. And yet like it. Turn on the bell and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.
Hello, my name is Shay. I love hamburgers and hate all kinds of diets, and that led me to the most horrible situation in my life. My mother is obsessed with eating right. She used to like discussing my shape while we were sitting at the table after dinner. She pointed at certain areas of my body and told me that I had to lose weight and to do sports to look slimmer. And while eating just another carrot or a cucumber, she usually added, "Well, don't worry, you'll be fine. I'll make you look gorgeous." Then she continued and normally talked about my father. Her first words were about how amazing and handsome he was and how happy they were together. Then she complained about the fact that he had left us, that he was a jerk. At such moments, I thought to myself, it must be the carrots that make you so mean. But I smiled at her and kept listening to her whining. I had to because I was underage and had to live with her. But I wanted so much to go somewhere else. I was dreaming about that every minute of my life. I wasn't fat, but I wasn't as slender as a deer either. However, I looked good. I could eat everything I wanted and still look normal, like millions of other girls, and I never had problems with boys, friends, study, or even sports. It was my mother only who made me feel miserable and insecure. If not for her, I could fully enjoy my life. We had all sorts of vegetables in the fridge. A few foods that were sugar and gluten-free, and plenty of chicken breasts, which were tasteless and dry as an old man's heel. Sometimes when my mom wasn't at home, I brought my favorite ketchup and poured it all over the chicken breast that my mother had cooked for me. And at those moments, it did taste good. As you have already understood, I had nothing to eat at home that looked attractive to me. So on my way to school, I would buy a burger in the nearest fast food cafe. This is what my life was like. When Mom saw me eating something that she considered unhealthy, she would keep me away from school for a few days, and I had to eat her vegetables and chicken breasts, which made me suffer. However, I stayed true to myself. So I started attending a culinary course where real cooks taught us how to make pastries. I was so fond of it that soon I found myself watching various YouTube videos about pastry. One of my favorite channels was for dinner TV. A girl is looking at the audience and speaking. The link is attached below, which provided me with tons of useful and interesting information. When my mother caught me watching it, she made a scene. She threatened to hire a person who would look after me all the time and even mentioned homeschooling. I didn't believe her, of course, but decided to be more careful, just in case. Soon, for some reason, burgers at the cafe where I usually bought them from became less delicious, and I began looking for an alternative. A couple of days later, I found a place with the most delicious burgers I had ever eaten. A homemade, juicy patty with a terrific sauce. The burgers were so delicious that I paid attention to the guy who sold them on my 10th visit only. And he was handsome, but his smile was a bit weird. He often stared at me like he could scan me. As time passed, I could notice that his smile got wider and wider, and I, myself, looked a lot more frequently. Once I noticed that he was looking at me, I choked on my burger and started coughing, which made him laugh cheerfully. He came up to me and introduced himself. His name was Mike, and he liked watching me. He said I was the only person who enjoyed his burger so much. I had to tell him about my mother and diets. Soon, we became friends. I stopped by every day to have a couple of his amazing burgers. Mike allowed me to enter the van where he cooked, and I could sit there eating and watching him work. We talked a lot. Sometimes customers asked him about the second seller, and Mike replied that the guy had quit the job. I noticed that he licked his lips in a certain way when he talked about the other guy. However, I thought that I was going crazy. I told Mike all about my family, that my dad had left us and provided my mom with a profitable business, which allowed us to live comfortably. In a few weeks, I noticed that Mike started acting weird. He used to be positive and good-natured, but turned into a gloomy and contemplative person. When I asked him about what was wrong, He said that everything was all right and I had nothing to worry about. But I saw that there was something that made him sad, and he looked at me differently. Once he took my hand and said, "We need to talk." I was surprised. I had never seen him like that. "At first, I need to tell you about my father. He died of cancer long ago, and I don't remember him very well, but my mom told me a lot about him. And, I think he is your father too." I was shocked. He continued, "Please, don't be nervous. I tried to not think about it, but there were too many coincidences. Besides, my mom would also start telling me good things about him and ended up saying that he was a jerk because he died so early." Mike told me everything, and the more he said, the more I believed that his father could be my father. He described his father's looks and character in the same way my mother did about my father. He also mentioned that his dad had been married twice, and that his first wife was obsessed with the idea of eating the right food. He soon got tired of all the diets that she had tried on him and left. Then he learned about his diagnosis and wanted to die somewhere in a peaceful place. When Mike finished, I realized how much I hated my mother, but I felt good too. I had a brother I could only dream about. I thought about how unhappy my dad was living with my mother. Suddenly, I understood that I couldn't stay with her anymore. I made up my mind to leave home. I told Mike about my decision and asked what he thought about this idea. He was glad about it and said that he would definitely support me and that the door of his house was open for me. I went home. While my mother was in the gym, I packed my stuff. When she arrived home, I told her everything I thought about her and her diets. Of course, she was shocked. And at a certain moment, I felt sorry for her. But I was sure I was doing the right thing. I left. I finally felt free. I started living with Mike, and those were the happiest days of my life. Although he lived in a van on the outskirts of the city, he cooked burgers for me, and those were perfect. I never thought that there were so many recipes for hamburgers. I noticed that I gained some weight. I told Mike about it, but he seemed happy and told me that he liked chubby girls. I reminded him that we were related. He smiled at me and said that my body was beautiful. He was funny. That's why he often made jokes about me, touched my belly, and even called me a piggy, which insulted me a bit. But he always said that he did that because he loved me, and at such moments his smile looked wild, and his eyes were angry. But I thought that I made it all up. However, his behavior changed and truly scared me. He kept repeating that I was his best piggy, and he touched me as if he were trying to understand if I was fat enough. So I decided to take my stuff and leave when I had a chance. It was a huge thunderstorm that night. I packed my things and waited until the midnight. When I was at the entrance door already, I heard Mike's muffled voice. "Where do you think you are going, piggy?" That voice was different, unlike Mike's normal voice. I looked back and saw him. He had a huge knife in his hand. I wanted to tell you, but I didn't know how," I began, but he interrupted me. "You are not going anywhere. I need you. Don't you understand why my burgers are so delicious? Because I use only fresh meat with certain fat content. But the secret is not about that." He grinned and approached me. I pushed the door open, but he grabbed my hair and pulled me back. No one heard my scream because of the storm. Mike dragged me to the bedroom and tied me. Then he continued, "So, my burgers are so delicious because I make them from human flesh. But you can't buy that at the store, of course. You have to produce it." He was licking his lips and sharpening his knife. "But you are my brother, aren't you?" I cried. "Well, I'm not. I tricked you," he laughed. "The owner of the fast food cafe that you like so much told me about his father, and you two seem to have a lot in common. Maybe he was your brother, but I was running out of meat, and he was fat, just like I needed it. And when you appeared, I decided to use this story. Besides, you were so miserable and sincere that it was simple for me to add a few details to make you believe you were my sister. I persuaded you to move to my place so easily, and it wasn't difficult to fatten you up because you love hamburgers so much." I decided to buy some time, so I asked him, "That's interesting. How did you start making hamburgers?" "Oh, it all started long ago. I just couldn't see that so much meat was wasted. I wish the owner of the cafe knew what meat I used to make those burgers he and his customers like so much, but he never asked. He liked the fact that people stood in lines waiting for our burgers, and that was the only thing he was interested in." While he was talking, I was thinking about how I could escape, but to my surprise, the door of the van opened and a man in a wet raincoat entered. He pointed his gun at Mike and asked him to put his knife on the floor and his arms behind his head. Mike seemed to lose control of the situation for a second, but then he jumped on the man with his knife. The man shot him. He was a local investigator who worked on a few cases of missing people, and all the leads he had were linked to this van. However, he didn't have any evidence to prove he was right. It was a miracle that he was watching the van during that night and saw me opening the door and Mike pulling me back by the hair. He hesitated for a few minutes and decided to enter the van without an order, and that saved my life. Then I learned that Mike was a serial killer, a maniac who had killed dozens of people from 6 states, and he killed only overweight people. As for my case, he enjoyed fattening me up. I was incredibly lucky to survive. Hamburgers and stress gave me gastritis, and doctors prescribed me a strict diet. I hate it, but I understand that I need it. My mother came to me as soon as she learned about what had happened to me. Apparently, she stressed out because I had left her, and when she looked through the files on my computer, she found the channel I used to like for dinner TV. She started baking things, and they were so great that she completely forgot about her carrots. She gained a lot of weight, so she needed a diet too. It brought us closer together. We discussed our ration and decided the extreme measures wouldn't do us any good. All we needed was well-balanced nutrition. That is the end of my story. Eat well and don't trust other people too much. By the way, Mom told me my father's story and why he left us. If you're interested, please click the like button, leave your comments, and subscribe to our channel. Bye!